I'd like to thank the Majority Leader for scheduling this debate about the agreement struck by the Obama administration and the leaders of the Islamic Republic of Iran. And it's important to highlight right up front what this deal is. It's nothing more than a political agreement between President Obama and the current leaders of Iran. This deal does not have the support of the American people, nor will it have the consent of their elected representatives here in Congress. At no point in the course of negotiating this deal did the Obama administration seek the advice and consent of the United States Senate or display any respect for the constitutional limits on the executive in foreign affairs. Nevertheless, I'm glad that the Senate's been debating this agreement because this is how the Senate is supposed to function, on the basis of open and robust deliberation. And I hope it's how the Senate will function well into the future on matters of national security and domestic policy. But if the debate that we're trying to have today could be congressional deliberation at its best, the Obama administration's deal with Iran is the product of diplomacy at its worst. As the negotiations neared completion earlier this year, President Obama began building his case for the deal on the specious claim that the only alternative to the deal was war. This black or white setup, the notion that the art of statesmanship is little more than navigating a series of binary either-or propositions, is plainly absurd. It misses the mark. We learned this from the fiasco following the New START Treaty in 2010. At that time, President Obama and Secretary Clinton warned that it was the only way to reset the relationship with Russia. But now, 5 years later, we know it was, in fact, the starting point for the worst era of U.S.-Russia relations since the Cold War. But the Obama administration has repeated this my way or war maxim with such faithful devotion and emotional conviction that it appears at some point along the way they began to believe it themselves. They actually started to believe this, even though it was wrong. Now, just look at the facts regarding this deal. Fact number one, the centerpiece of the agreement is the lifting of significant portions of the multilateral financial, energy, and transportation sanctions currently imposed against Iran. Lifting these sanctions and lifting them prior to any meaningful action by Iran in exchange will immediately give the world's largest supporter of terrorism access to tens of billions of dollars in currently frozen assets. And that's just on day one, Mr. President. Welcoming Iran with open arms to the global marketplace will provide untold future riches to Tehran's revolutionary government. The current sanctions are not perfect, but they're in place for a very, very good reason: to restrict Iran's access to resources that we know its radical leaders will use to acquire nuclear weapons and continue exporting terrorism, not only throughout the region, but throughout the world. This isn't a matter of speculation. It's not a matter of hyperbole. It's exactly what Iran's own leaders have told us in no uncertain terms. These sanctions were originally put in place in response to Iran's repeated violations of previous nuclear agreements. And it's complete fantasy to believe that they can be revived in the future, when, not if, but when they cheat on this deal. Fact number two, nothing in the agreement will prevent Iran from developing a nuclear weapon, and it won't. Under the terms of this deal, the Iranian government will be allowed to conduct research on more advanced nuclear centrifuges after only 8 years. And after 15 years, there will be no limits whatsoever on their nuclear fuel production. No limits whatsoever. To believe that this deal will stop the Iranian nuclear weapons program requires an act of blind faith. In fact, it requires us to disregard the facts altogether. Fact number three, This agreement will increase Iran's access to conventional weapons and ballistic missiles. It will do this by providing for the removal of the UN conventional arms and ballistic missile technology embargo. If this seems out of place in an agreement that was supposed to be about Iran's nuclear weapons program, well, that's because it is. It's entirely out of place for this type of agreement. It was never supposed to be part of the deal. But you see, in the 11th hour of negotiations, the Ayatollah demanded it, sensing, rightly, that the Obama administration was unlikely to object. Mr. President, this deal is not the work of savvy negotiation. No, this deal is the product of desperate capitulation. For years, this administration has been dead set on reaching a deal, any deal, with the mullahs in Iran. And that's why they got the deal they did. An agreement that fulfills a wish list for the Iranians and the sprawling network of terrorist groups that depend on their largesse, including Hezbollah, Hamas, the Houthis in Yemen, and Bashar al-Assad's tyrannical regime in Syria. And what does the United States get in exchange? Well, we get a promise from the Ayatollah to abandon Iran's 35-year quest for deliverable nuclear weapons, weapons they crave for the explicit purpose, as they put it, of wiping Israel off the face of the earth and fulfilling the aspiration of their infamous motto, death to America. Evidently, this is good enough for the Obama administration and for the supporters of this deal. But it's not good enough for the American people, not even close. In fact, the public opposes the proposed deal by a 2-to-1 margin, but not because they're clamoring for war with Iran. The truth is that most Americans would prefer a diplomatic solution to the problems posed by Iran's apocalyptic, nuclear, ambitious theocracy. But this is not a diplomatic solution. This diplomacy won't solve anything.